know, in fact, there is an ongoing, what we will call sequence or burst of seismic activity that is occurring off the northeast coast, northeast of Barbados, about 100 kilometers north of Barbados. If you think of it in a line, if you think of where St. Lucia is in the region, if you travel on an airplane towards the easterly direction from St. Lucia, about 50 to 100 kilometers, and then if you go northeast of Barbados and where that line intersects is more or less where the events are happening. Now, the first thing to note about the events is that the events are what we call, people who monitor earthquakes, what we call tectonic earthquakes. What that means is that they are earthquakes that are related to the normal movement of large parts of the earth crust, which we call plates, tectonic plates. These plates move, and where they interact, where the boundaries of the plates interact with each other, and in this context, where the Caribbean plate is interacting with another plate that we call the North American plate, or depending on who speaks, they might call it the South American plate. Basically a plate to the east and one to the west, which we are on, which is the Caribbean plate. Because of that interaction, and because the interaction isn't smooth, because the plates get essentially, these large bodies get stuck, stress build up, and eventually it builds up to such an extent that it gets released in what we call fracturing of the earth. The fracturing actually happens very deep beneath the surface. In this case, the earthquakes are happening, or the fracturing that's generating the vibration of the ground that we detect by our instruments is happening between about 40 kilometers to about 100 kilometers. It's sort of shallow to medium depth in our kind of parlance. So they're related to this normal process. The Caribbean plate, the plate that we are all residing on, is moving towards the east at a rate of about 2 centimeters per year. It's like as fast as a fingernail growing. That's how fast, that's why we don't feel it. But because if you think of this large mass of the Earth's crust moving in one direction, and it's hitting against another large mass that is moving in the opposite direction, you know, they're not moving smoothly, and what happens is that they collide, in a sense, they bounce against each other. In our case, one dips onto the other, and you have what we call subduction, and because one part of the Earth's crust is subducting another, it then goes deep into the Earth, and it creates magma, which we get as volcanoes. So this process is what causes the islands to form, what causes volcanoes to form. But one of the other results of this process is that stresses build up, and when they get released, we have earthquakes. And sometimes we have larger magnitude earthquakes, like the 6.4. I think we reported it as a 6.4 event a few days last week or so. We have actually revised it up to about 6.6. Now, when you have that kind of event, you tend to have a lot of what we call aftershocks associated with it. Again, if you think of it, it's like if you have a large breakage in the earth, what happens that in a sense destabilizes things a little bit. So there's a lot of, so if a fault fractures or break, which is what generates the earthquake, a number of other related parts of the Earth's crust has to adjust, and therefore other little breakages happen. So therefore these aftershocks are like the Earth's crust around that large fracturing, adjusting to the fact that you have now made a break, and you have just released energy. So these aftershocks again are normal. What would tend to happen is that if you have a magnitude, if you have a big earthquake, or you know, like this one, probably a magnitude 6, you'd have a number of magnitude 5s aftershocks. You have a little bit more magnitude 4 aftershocks, a little bit more magnitude 3 aftershocks, and succeedingly as you get smaller and smaller, you have more events. That's why if people have been following on our Facebook site and our website, you'll see that you now still having events. You haven't had any that are magnitude 6 anymore, because the big one has, in this sequence, the largest one has happened. And what we had is we had about 2 or 3 5s, and we have had quite a few 4s, and we have had even more 3s. And we'd expect that kind of aftershock sequence to perhaps continue for the next couple of weeks. Sometimes, depending on how big the event is, they could actually go on for months. I don't know if people recall, a couple of years ago, you had a magnitude 7 that happened off the north coast of Martinique. That aftershock sequence went on for years. Of course, that doesn't mean that people keep on feeling events, because the events that I'm talking about, the aftershock sequence, the events get very small. So we will detect them. So when I say it continue on for years, it's not for people to now start worrying that, you know, doesn't mean we're going to keep on feeling these earthquakes for the next couple of months. No, most likely you would not feel them. We would detect them.